What is your name, where did you go to school, and what is your occupation?
My name is John Davenport, so I went to college at Yale in 1985 to 89 and worked a few jobs before going to grad school, and now I'm a professor at Fordham.
What issues were you protesting at college?
The big issues of the day when I came to college in fall of 1985 were nuclear disarmament, resisting Reagan's efforts to increase nuclear arms and to put in a new generation of cruise missiles, and the fight against apartheid in South Africa, which was a brutal system of segregation in place at the time. College students around the United States were trying to support European efforts against apartheid by trying to get colleges to divest their endowments, which are large amounts of money if you put together the endowments of all the biggest universities in the country. To force colleges to divest from South Africa was thought to be, a great way of putting pressure on the Botha government in South Africa to end apartheid and to release Nelson Mandela from jail. I can say more about that.
How did you protest divestment in apartheid South Africa?
Well, at the time when I came to college, I joined the Yale Political Union. There were lots of student groups involved in the anti-apartheid protests. One group had built a sort of a shanty town on Beinecke Plaza, which is a very prominent area in front of the Yale Commons and the Yale President's office, this so-called Winnie Mandela City. Students were living in it, week round. They were even sleeping there, and that was in effort to, highlight the evils of apartheid and try to pressure the Yale Corporation and Board of Trustees to divest the Yale Endowment. Similar things happening at other colleges around the country. So that was one sort of, kind of pressure, the divestment movement. But as happened at other colleges, when speakers would come through who were talking about the apartheid issue, there would often be a large student turnout. There was one particularly controversial example during the height of this crisis over South Africa, as the Comprehensive Anti-Apartheid Bill was making its way back to Congress, for Congress to try to override President Reagan's veto. The Yale Political Union, I believe it was, decided to invite the South African ambassador to the United States to come give a talk at Yale. So this guy showed up. I guess they were trying to give him, his chance to have his say. As did not happen in most cases, this guy was shouted down. That's a pretty extreme measure, right? Not to let someone talk or give their point of view, but the enormous crowd that turned out to greet this ambassador, I think largely felt that his position, his government's policies were so egregious that it was legitimate in this case to actually shout him down. He had no right even to give his speech. I think that these student protests at colleges around the country, the divestment movement that had already begun on college campuses, helped bring Congress to the point where they were able to override Reagan's veto and pass the Comprehensive Anti-Apartheid Act, which spelled the doom of that system. It's probably one of the most successful peaceful protest movements in history in terms of bringing about significant, deep political change.
Can you elaborate on the disarmament issue?
A huge issue in the 1980s, because when Reagan had come into the presidency, he made a big push to try to increase the American nuclear arsenal to put pressure on the Soviet Union, as it still was at the time. He had gone to the extent of trying to put new missiles in Germany and Britain, although Margaret Thatcher, the conservative prime minister at the time, supported this. There was a lot of anger, especially in Britain, at this new buildup of nuclear arms. Religious leaders in both Europe and the United States were heavily opposed to it. So there had already been a lot of pushback in Europe. Of course, college students in the United States were also protesting this new arms race, as it seems like it was becoming. There were marches on college campuses around the United States. Because I lived in Britain at the time, I participated in one of the big marches in London. There were several. One, 250,000 people, one that was probably more like 150,000. I participated in a big march that filled some of the largest avenues in London, all sponsored by what was called at the time the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, with its famous peace symbol you've seen in the circle. That was, I think, in Europe, a very effective student-led protest movement. It involved more people of all ages, especially when you get to these large marches in cities like London. It wasn't just college students.
Do protests abroad have resonance in America?
Depends a lot, probably, on to what extent college students in this country pick up on a protest movement that started somewhere else. For example, in the case of the more recent Wall Street protests, those really started here and then spread abroad. In the case of the protests against apartheid in South Africa in the 80s, that really started in Europe. Of course, you know, the government that was sponsoring apartheid traced its roots to European colonists who'd come in there in the late 19th and early 20th century. So protests in Holland and Germany and Britain had eventually spread to American college campuses and inspired a generation of American students who, looking for their version of a civil rights movement. Since the civil rights era had come and gone, American college students found this as a new cause to sponsor the values of racial justice and racial equality. I think that's probably why that issue resonated so much in the United States, because it connected to some extent with our own history of the civil rights movement. And once it took off in the United States, I think that really proved to be decisive, because that Comprehensive Anti-Apartheid Law, which Ed Kennedy succeeded in pushing through over Reagan's opposition, really spelled the end of that regime and eventually led to de Klerk freeing Mandela, who became, as you know, president of South Africa.
How do you think student protests differ from regular protests?
Well, for some reason it seems that protests on college campuses get a lot of media attention. And college students know that, so even in my days as a college student pre-internet, students realized that staging protests like the Winnie Mandela City, like the angry mob that almost attacked the ambassador from South Africa, would get coverage on the front pages of major newspapers, or even TV stations. So college students know that they're going to have an impact that way.